Hello everyone, it's Mariners Fanatic back with another video, and today we'll be going over the off-season preview for the Seattle Mariners, what to expect over the next few months following the conclusion of the 2021 World Series. It's still a couple weeks away until free agency and everything opens up, but I would just want to kind of get this video out there early so that you all know what to expect when the offseason hits the ground running, especially since Jerry Dipoto has already said that he will be aggressive from the start. I'm assuming that most of the moves that the Mariners make will be done in November and December. You won't see much in January or February leading up to spring training, as Dipoto is going to want to get all of that stuff done ahead of time. So in this video, I'm going to be covering our priorities for what we need to be looking for this offseason, as well as the offseason schedule in general. Some of you may or may not be familiar with what goes on in the offseason, so we're going to take a quick look at that. So this is going to be a big video with a lot of stuff to cover. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. So first off, let's look at our priorities with what we target through free agency and trades over the offseason. The number one priority is getting a true ace of the staff. Our pitching was pretty solid this year. However, it would be extremely nice to have somebody like a Max Scherzer who you know is going to go out there and give you 7 innings every game he pitches. Now, whether or not we can get Max Scherzer is up for debate. It's not particularly likely, but we'll talk about that stuff more in another video. But the main concern is getting another frontline starter and possibly even another 4 or 5 starter. We know that Yusei Kikuchi is likely going to pick up his player option for next year, so he'll likely be with the team unless he's moved via trade. But even then, we don't know how they're going to utilize him, if they're going to give him another shot as maybe the 5 starter or what. So 1 or 2 starting pitchers for the rotation is key. Another point to that is Hancock, Kirby, Brash, and Williamson are all waiting in the wings and could see their debuts in 2022, but it's not likely for them to start the year with the club. Considering our injuries in the rotation last year, you don't want to take that chance again, and so it would be nice to target a couple starters. The next biggest priority is getting a bat for the lineup, probably even 2 bats. As I said already, I'll go into more of who we're going to target in another video, but we need a middle of the order bat, preferably a third or second baseman. Obviously, names like Chris Bryant and Marcus Semien have flown around, but we need somebody of that caliber, whether it's through trade or free agency, to give a boost to the lineup and some consistency in one of those infield positions. Toro obviously brought a little bit more consistency to the position of second base and third base after the trade deadline. However, Seager is likely not sticking around, so that brings another hole into the equation, and replacing him and increasing the productiveness of our lineup for 2022. The next priority, as far as adding players to the team, is a left-handed bullpen arm. This is something I've been harping on since the middle of last season. I was not comfortable with Anthony Misevich as the main lefty out of the pen. We picked up Doolittle, and he did okay, but he wasn't fantastic, and it's not particularly a high likelihood of us bringing him back. So I'd like to see some effort put towards filling that position of need, in my opinion. I know we still have control over Misevich, so maybe you could use him as a piece in a trade for something during the offseason and then go get a more prominent left-handed bullpen arm through trade or free agency. Whatever way it gets done, we need to get a left-handed bullpen arm besides just Misevich if he does stay. Now, 2 more positions of need, but they're not particularly pressing, is center field and catcher. Now, some of you are probably like, center field? We have Kelnick in center field. Well, yes, that's true. And yes, Kyle Lewis played center field for us all of 2020. But we don't know what's going to happen with Lewis. We don't know if he's going to be healthy for a full year. His knees are very concerning, not only to me, but to the organization. And that's been pretty clear with some of the comments that Dipoto and Service have made over the course of the last year. So we can't really rely on Lewis to take up that mantle. And then Kelnick struggled a lot early on with defense out in center field. He progressed as the year went along, and of course his bat progressed as well. But personally, I've always seen him as more of a little bit of a left fielder. I think he would transition well to left. Some people were telling me, oh, he didn't play well in left field either. Well, he didn't really have very many opportunities there. So Just like he got better in center field, he would probably get better in left field. And from my viewpoint, if we knew that Lewis was not going to be healthy, we can't have two outfield positions filled and just continually rotating another position as well. There's also the fact that Mitch Haniger likely won't be playing as much outfield as he has in the past, especially if Julio Rodriguez does come up. So even though there are a lot of options in the outfield, it's a bit more of a question mark than people are admitting to. And so center field might be a position that we take a look at, as well as catcher. Yes, we have Cal Raleigh, we have Tom Murphy, and we've got Luis Torrens. We also have Godoy and O'Keefe in AAA. However, those guys are not necessarily impact bats or defensive catchers at the moment. Raleigh did okay behind the plate, but struggled with the bat quite a bit. Tom Murphy struggled with both aspects early on in the season and then kind of picked things up in the second half. But Tom mostly hits left-handed pitching and struggled pretty heavily against righties. The same thing was true about Torrens. His defense was terrible behind the plate. When they moved him to DH, he took hold of that role, hit lefties really well, and started to hit righties as the season went along. Torrens is not likely to continue catching. Personally, I would prefer to never see him behind the plate again in a Mariners uniform. But we'll see what happens there. It would be nice to target a veteran catcher like Yan Gomes or even Mike Zunino if the Rays don't pick up his team option. There's a couple other options out there. There's also options through trade that could be explored. We need to have a little bit more consistency out of our catchers next year. And even with Cal Raleigh staying, presumably he has to prove that he can hit at the big league level. Last year obviously was his first year, so you cut him some slack. But if he doesn't start to figure it out this next year in 2022, it might be time to start looking at other options as the season progresses. So it would be nice to have a bit of insurance there already if you do go and target a catcher in the off season. So it was a bit long-winded there, but that is kind of what we're looking at for priorities. One being a frontline starting pitcher, two being a bat in the middle of the lineup, preferably in the infield, a left-handed bullpen arm, and then possibly a center fielder or catcher to give us some consistency at those positions. So let's take a look at the schedule and what's going to be happening over the offseason. Right after the World Series ends, free agency opens, but it is mainly for negotiations between teams and those players that are exiting their team. For example, we have about a week if we want to negotiate with Kyle Seager and Yusei Kikuchi about their options. That's when that happens. And you have about a week for that. And then after that week, free agency opens up and everybody can talk to everybody. Trade market starts to get active and all of that starts to occur. Qualifying offers are extended to certain players who fit the criteria to earn one. Around this time, season awards are presented as well. So the first couple weeks of the offseason are pretty busy. There likely won't be any trades during this time, but a lot of things are going to happen. Later in November, probably a couple weeks after the World Series, is the qualifying offer tender deadline. This is when teams have to finalize their decisions of whether to offer certain players qualifying offers. And then on December 1st, and this is a big one, the CBA between the league and the Players Association is up, and negotiations need to start being had in order for there to be baseball next year. We really do not want a strike to occur, so I'm hoping that everything is resolved and they can get a new contract set in place. But we'll see what happens, as the last couple of years have been a little bit fiery between the Players Association and the owners. So let's just hope that everything goes well. We can get negotiations done by that December deadline or soon after, so that there's no strike or late start to the season because of a prolonged negotiation period. As we move into December, the first thing that happens is 40-man roster deadline, where you have to assign players to the 40-man roster. Certain players will be protected and put on the 40-man roster so that they're not targeted in the Rule 5 draft, which happens later on. Not long after that, there's a non-tender deadline. Basically, players who are under team control are offered contracts, and if they're not offered a contract, they get non-tendered and head to free agency. Next up, in early to mid-December, we have the GM winter meetings. This is where a lot of trades happen, and it's just a time for front offices to meet and talk about stuff. And that's why a lot of times trades happen, because they're all in one place and it's easy to communicate, and stuff gets done a little bit quicker depending on the situation. I expect Jerry Dipoto to finish most of his moves by this point, or right before Christmas, the end of the year. He's probably not going to make any moves beyond that unless something comes out of the woodwork unexpected. Not long after the winter meetings, the Rule 5 draft comes up. I won't get into it too much because it's pretty complicated, but basically, the Rule 5 draft is where players not on the 40-man roster have the ability to be selected in a draft. And if they are selected, they have to stay on the big league club the entire season. And if they aren't, then they're returned to the team they were drafted from. For example, last year we drafted Will Vest from the Detroit Tigers. He was on the team for about 2 or 3 months and continued to struggle, so we DFA'd him and he was returned to the Tigers. The previous year, Johan Ramirez was selected, and Ramirez did very well and stayed on the club for all of 2020 and was back on the club for 2021 and is hopefully going to continue to be a part of our bullpen. So that's kind of as brief of an explanation as I can give, where it's basically a lottery ticket. You're taking a chance on a player. Getting into January and February, you start to hear about arbitration, is where players who have earned enough service time to start the arbitration process get to negotiate their contract with the team. Players that are better than others, of course, earn a lot more money. For example, Matt Olson of the Oakland Athletics is going to make quite a bit in his next arbitration hearing, as he had a phenomenal year. And then, of course, in our case, we have players like J.P. Crawford and Mitch Haniger who need to go through arbitration. It's usually players who have not reached veteran status yet, but they've been around the league for a few years, and so they get to negotiate with the team their contract for the next season. And it sometimes goes to arbitration hearings to decide what that number is if there's a disagreement between the player and the team. And then, of course, in mid February, you have spring training starting up, and that goes pretty much right up to the start of the season. This is going to be a very fun and busy off season. I'm going to try and keep being as consistent as I can with these weekly uploads, as there's a lot to cover. So stick with me, and it's going to be a fun one. Hopefully, we can get that CBA negotiated and there's no strike, because the Mariners are in a good spot for next season. And if the right moves are made, we don't want a strike getting in the way of us and making the playoffs. Anyways, with that said, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Mariners Fanatic, out.